Good evening, everybody. My name's Edith Bowman. Thank you so much for joining us. I say this evening, but you may well be watching in other parts of the world. So wherever you are, hope you're having a lovely Friday so far. Thank you for joining us for this wonderful BAFTA Q&A. And I hope that some of you have taken the opportunity to watch this incredible film that we're about to talk to Ron and Michelle about. It's an incredibly moving and an emotional film that I definitely felt like made me question quite a lot of things after watching it as well. And it's an honour to be able to chat to them both this evening. Just quickly before I introduce them, to say that we do have closed captions available tonight. So if you would like to use that facility, then you just need to click that option on the screen. We're also going to open it up to audience questions. So we would love for you, a fantastic opportunity for you to submit some questions, which I'm afraid I'll have to ask on your behalf this evening. But, you know, needs must. So please get involved on the comments and share your questions, and I will put those to Ron and Michelle. So without further ado, please welcome this evening's guests. First up, filmmaker Ron Howard. Thank you so much for joining us, Ron. How are you, sir?
I'm well. A pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
And please let me introduce to you the wonderful Michelle John. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us this evening. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Edith. I'm fine. Feel healthy. Hanging in there.
Thank you so much for sparing the time to talk to us about this incredible film. Ron, if you don't mind me starting with you, I just wanted to ask, you know, this was an incredible. As soon as the film starts, you're in this experience. You feel like you're part of it, and you're going through it with all these characters that we learn and get to know and feel part of. But what made you want to tell this story and make this film, first of all?
Well, as is always the case, you know, we're horrified by these events when we see them, you know, reported and read about them. But in this instance, it was all a little more personal to me because I have a lot of relatives in Reading, and my mother-in-law, who passed away some years ago, but lived for about 5 years in Paradise. So I'd been to that town. I'd seen it at its bustling best, you know. Yeah. And so my very close relatives were in Reading. They survived what was called the car fire. And although they were threatened by it and had to evacuate and things like that, but all's well that ends well there. And then within a few weeks, now there's another fire. And my assistant, longtime assistant, who also knew everybody up there, Louisa Vellis, she said, "Well, it's so powerful. Have you been looking at these images of Paradise?" And I said, "Yeah, it's just heartbreaking, and because the devastation was so complete. Reading got hurt, but Paradise was, flattened." And it was actually her who said, "I wonder how they're going to rebuild. I mean, rebuilding Paradise is a story." And immediately went to our documentary group at Imagine Entertainment, Justin Wilkes and Sarah Bernstein, and said, I'd like to make a verite documentary. I've been looking for a subject. I'm very curious about this story. I'm heartbroken by it, and I feel it on a personal level. What do you think? And within a couple of days, we had the support of Nat Geo to go cover the story. And so that's what we began to do. And we learned so much. Our idea was to sort of come and go with real regularity over a period of about a year, and just, learn from it, share what we learned. What's it like once the sort of the media focus disappears, and you're left with what you're left with.
It must have been particularly because you had that personal connection with there when you went there for the first time. I mean, that must have been quite an extraordinary experience for you personally to witness that.
It was pretty shocking. Well, it was more than pretty shocking. I don't mean to modify. It was devastating. And at that point, there wasn't a clear sense of even how many people had died. But you know, it's one of those things where pictures can't do justice. I mean, our film tries, but our film can't do justice. When you're there and you see it and you feel it and you register it on, you know, in every set of eyes that, you know, that who you can, you know, you make contact with, it's palpable. And I'll tell you, in a very different way, but the first film I ever worked on was when I was a very young boy. It was 1958, and it was Europe. And there were places where you could see areas that were still destroyed from World War II, and flattened. And where we were shooting, you know, there were sections that had not been rebuilt yet. And you know, this felt like a very similar in that sort of ghost-like quality. Yeah. I mean, in this case, it was so immediate. It had just transpired, and with this shocking intensity and speed.
To tell the story so well and to really kind of connect with the personal tragedy that everyone's going through in various ways, it was, you know, finding these people that you needed to tell the story was such an important thing. And Michelle, I mean, you know, as soon as you come on screen, you kind of, you know, you feel like we know you, because you have this warmth that you just immediately exude as soon as you're on screen. You're wonderful and you're incredibly inspiring, I have to say, from watching you in this film. And so thank you for the time tonight. What was your reaction? Because you were going through this, you know, with your friends, with your family at the time, and you have a film crew who rock up and they go, we want to film this, we want to tell your story, sort of thing. What was your reaction? What was the reality of that like?
Well, I was fine with it. I didn't even think twice. Zan and Liz, they're two producers, and they just have a warmth that they exude. We have become very good friends over this, and we still are good friends to this day. And they build the trust in you till you don't even realize that they're there. I mean, there were a couple times when we were in some big meetings and I would say some words and I'd turn to them and say, oh my gosh, take that out. Because they weren't words I wanted out there that I say.
I'm not sure we did. I'm not sure we took them all out, did we?
It's very funny because you stop thinking about them. You're so into the moment and what you're going to do, you know, with your own personal life and then with my professional life with the schools, that you just forget they're there and you go about doing things that you have to do to make sure people are safe and they have what they need.
Michelle was so heroic as we started focusing in on individuals that we wanted to follow. She was both incredibly articulate and about it, and active, just in the middle of everything. And right now her entrance in the movie is this sort of shot from inside a car, and she's getting out and it pans around. And the narrative movie maker in me always thinks, you know, that Sergio Leone, badass, good, bad, and the ugly music. Because you just feel like Michelle she's on the case.
Yeah. If she's on your side, you are winning.
You're well ahead. You are well ahead.
That was the school that I was principal at several years before. It was the oldest school in Paradise. And the first time I had gone there, I went there the day after the fire. The fire chief took me up there, and it was, you know, every emotion in the world came out to see that school totally destroyed. But then you get into the mode that, okay, how do we fix this? How do we get kids back? What do we need to do? This is a devastating thing, and doggone it, but is it going to define us, or are we going to keep moving on?
How was it for you? Hard. How was it for you watching the film for the first time, Michelle?
It was pretty rough. I think I had a bottle of Rombauer and a whole box of Kleenex, and it was pretty rough. But Zan and Liz prepared me, and they were with me, and they said, okay, here's a scene, get prepared. And so they kind of prepared me for different scenes. Of course, the roughest scene was at my husband's celebration with the kids beside me. And it was rough. I was so proud of Ron though and his crew for what they did. It's just a beautiful, beautiful story. And it needs to be told because of all the climate change also. It needs to be told.
That's the wonderful thing I think about the film is that it's so many things, Ron. It's not just a straightforward documentary about a tragedy. It is, all these individual characters that we meet and we're introduced to could almost have their own standalone movie or documentary. But then even underneath all that, you have all these incredible themes going on as well, and really important questions that are being raised by you, because I think that that's the thing about a really great documentary, is that it's not giving you answers to everything. It's not telling you the right and the wrong, the solutions, what should have happened or not. It's almost making you question. Was that the intention, from the start?
Without a doubt, it was always about, observation. And there was no agenda because there was sort of no way to have one going into the film. I'm still early enough in my sort of development as a documentarian, and that I both so enjoy the company of the full-fledged documentary filmmakers that I get to work with on all of these projects. But so far I've almost always selected a movie. Like I did a film about looking behind the scenes at a Jay-Z music festival called Made in America. That was the first film I did. And I started thinking, well, this is like Altman. This is like Nashville. Let's just follow the tentacles of everyone involved and let's see what we learn. The Beatles 8 days a week. We were only doing the touring years. I started to think of it as Das Boot. It's like they're this group of people. They care about each other. They're on a mission. All kinds of things are going on, out there that they don't fully understand or can't entirely grasp, but they know they're trying to get from here to there and stay alive. Pavarotti was more of a family story, and the story of a family navigating a complicated existence, and an emotional one, and yet still a celebration of this unique talent. And with Paradise, I began to think, as we began interviewing people and I began meeting people and even shooting a little bit. I rode along in the car with Michelle, interviewing her at one point. And I'm not great, but some of those shots made it in the movie. Began to think of it as our town, because I thought that the voices of the people who are going through it were going to be more important than our trying to present a narrative. And at the end of the day, I think the thing that surprised me the most was certainly it reveals vulnerabilities in society. That despite being in a fire area, despite a lot of effort, conversation, planning, it still couldn't be enough for this. So the unexpected can happen. What does that look like? And what are the safety nets in place? What do we really need, us human beings, when that kind of catastrophe strikes? Sometimes it's more than you were perhaps willing to invest in ahead of time or would have supported ahead of time. So I thought those were interesting. But the real object lesson to me was in problem solving, because what a great example of people like Michelle, her late husband, Phil, before he passed, just throwing in and saying what needs to be done here. Yeah. And suddenly there is a common goal that, the handful of people, the couple of thousand people that sort of decided we're really going to try to fight this and hang in, would meet at these meetings and they'd argue and they'd struggle, but they would move the needle, and they could do it because they had this in common and they decided to. And to me, that if there's an inspiring lesson or something to really glean from this, it's that we're still pretty good problem solvers. Does it always have to be a catastrophe to rally us? like that is
Yeah.
I hope a question that people think about.
I was really inspired as well by the, and I loved that you sort of really showed the different generations of community of Paradise. You know, you told the stories, the characters, you know, Zach and Brandon, for example, you know, these kind of young kids who almost kind of, there was a real drive in them to kind of to stay and to find their place and to find a purpose for what Paradise was to them. Was that important for you to kind of almost show, you know, these different generations of characters from this place and how it affected them and how they found this resilience and within the situation?
Well, in the beginning, you know, we went and Zan and Liz and our camera teams, and we were just casting a wide net.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, sure, we were looking for people of various generations and circumstances and exploring, but we couldn't manipulate this. And that's not what we were doing. We were fortunate that people were not kicking us out. And so slowly but surely, you know, we began to see this was going to be a film about the people who are resilient and choose to try.
Yeah.
You know, there were a lot of people who left. They disappeared so quickly we couldn't keep up with them. There were people that we interviewed who were fascinating, and some of them are in the film in the first, you know, minutes of the film, and we don't know. We couldn't find them. Couldn't find them to even follow up. So the film presented itself to us. The narrative presented itself to us, and I will just say, just a little nod. I might be wearing this. I'm wearing the Jacob Burns Film Center. It's a media learning group and a film society that I'm a board member here in New England, in Connecticut.
Oh, yeah.
And Jonathan Demme was one of the founders, and a great guy, fantastic guy, and a great documentarian, as well as, of course, an Academy Award winning narrative director. And when I first asked him if I could take the leap, I was a little intimidated by it. And he said, do it. This was before that Jay-Z documentary. He said, do it. Go in with a point of view. You need that, but recognize that you're going to be surprised. And that's going to be the good news. It's not going to be the story that you think it is. And so the Rebuilding Paradise was the first really vivid example of that. I was always grateful that Jonathan nudged me in this direction, and I miss him a lot. We all do.
Michelle, for you, in terms of, you know, we watch Ron used the word resilience there, and it's, you know, it's incredible, the determination as well, and the graduation obviously is a big moment I cried so much when the kids throw their hats up and you see they've done all their own personalized, you know, sort of things on the top, and then there's an amazing kind of spirit to these kids in Paradise that I haven't really seen on screen anywhere else. I don't think what was that like for you to watch, and how would you describe that?
Well, being a member of the community for 30 years and our own three kids graduate from Paradise, it's a multi-generational town. And a lot of those kids, their parents had graduated, their grandparents, and that's why it was such a big deal to them to graduate on Amrath Field. And when I made that pledge in front of the entire town a week after the fire, I think I walked off and probably used a couple words about how in the world am I going to pull this off, but I don't think I said that. And so then I just started working on it, and they just kept throwing things after things, the water thing, the trees, everything. You can't do this. It's not going to work. And it's like, don't tell us we can't. That's all these kids are asking for. They've lost their homes. They lost their schools. They're working out of storefronts. No, that's not acceptable. What do we need to do? And then you get all the state bureaucracy and the federal bureaucracy, and the trees were a big issue, huge issue on how to get the trees down. And how do we do this? And money always seems to be an issue. with the federal government and the state government. It's like, no, there's going to be a way. I'll take my chainsaw. We're going to cut them down and say, oops, sorry. We're going to get those trees down. Those kids are going to walk on that field. And that's what we did. A long story short, and a lot of tears, and making friends with the governor and the state superintendent and those kind of things, and saying, please, you have to ask for help. Yeah. And I asked for help.
And I think part of that exuberance, Edith, really is that when I talked to some of the kids, and this is actually after it was over, but they were pretty negative. A couple of the guys, Zach and a couple of the people that we interviewed were, they remember they said, well, it's in the film. I'm not even, I'm not going to go to graduation unless it's there. And later when we were screening at Sundance, a couple of those guys came and they said they never in a million years thought the graduation would happen. And I think a lot of the students wanted it, but thought it was a bridge too far. Michelle and her supporters, they built that bridge somehow. They got it done.
Oh, we all need a Michelle in our life, basically.
We could all use a Michelle. We really could.
We all need a Michelle in our life. That is for sure.
Thank you.
The footage as well. At the start, obviously, you managed to get hold of all this. Whilst this fire is raging, was that easy to access? How did you access that?
We just began asking questions early on, and it actually started with fire and police body cameras. And then I kept saying, I wonder if people had the presence of mind to video this or not. And so I think Liz got on Facebook and honestly just started asking questions. And we personally would ask people, just when we were interviewing them, and we began to see that yes, there was this incredible wealth of footage that was so intense. We started trying to sort of analyze how we would apply it. As with documentaries, you sort of have to discover these things, but it became clear that we could create, thanks to Gladys and Mickey, these unbelievable editors who sifted through all of this incredibly harrowing sequence. It's about as intense as anything I've ever been involved with as a director.
Absolutely.
And so personal. And then we, every once in a while, we would revert to it just to keep reminding audiences that terrifying 9 or 10 minute sequence, these are the people, remember, don't forget, they lived through that. Their thinking, their decisions, everything is informed by that. And so it became almost a motif to occasionally go back to that footage. But it was powerful. But people wanted this story told. And I think when they saw that we weren't leaving, that we were going to keep coming back. When Zan and Liz got to know people, I came when I could and to visit and connect. I think there was a kind of a trust that was built up, and that I think our film really benefited from.
I guess the hardest thing must have been knowing when to stop and when to leave, and when the kind of almost.
That's where the real documentarians come in, and because I'm a big baby. The minute I think somebody's a little uncomfortable, I want to get out of the room. But that's not what good documentarians do. They don't pester, but they in their way, they know how to understand. Well, they've had hours and years of experience engaging with people, and of course these are great people with great hearts, but they also know that we're here trying to understand something, and sometimes that's it's not going to be entirely comfortable. They don't provoke or dig in, but they have a kind of an emotional endurance that maybe I don't, to stay a little longer and ask another question.
Was it easy to know though when you kind of go, okay, I think we've got what we need to make a film, you know, in terms of we have to go now kind of thing, you know, sort of.
Well, we always knew we wanted to basically do the year. So, you know, we knew you know, and it's a much bigger story than that. And Paradise, California is, you know, it's yet to be determined, you know, to what extent it can come back and will flourish and so forth. But we just wanted to look at that really intense period of time. And so that was our understanding. But, you know, we began editing immediately and building threads, because that would help us understand how to focus our resources. And, you know, and by the last sort of 4 months of the story, we were going back and revisiting people that we already knew were engaged in a way, and we had scenes, we had moments, we had conversations that presented questions, narrative questions that we would want to have answered. And so it you know, as I said, it's a story that defined itself, and we just kept chipping away and looking. And this is where my scripted experience in the documentary realm serves me well, because as a director, I really shoot for the editing room. I'm interested in those little happy accidents. And yes, I go with a plan and stage the actors, but I'm always have a B camera shooting. And I'm always excited when they come up with something that surprises me, something I wouldn't have necessarily thought of. And then go in and really see what your story is. My first cuts are usually long and kind of awkward, because I've wanted to explore on the set, even though we might have a script that we all believe in, and see what else we could find. So finding that story, honing it, in all the docs that I've worked on so far, has been the part where I feel like in many ways I've been able to contribute the most, and I've learned from it as well.
Michelle, I think it's a beautiful tribute to your late husband as well, and his personality and his character, and your relationship, and what you meant to each other, but also what Paradise meant to him as well. What do you think he'd have made of the film?
He would have loved the film. Zan and Liz, the first time they came to Paradise, my husband and the fire chief were the first two people they met. And then Phil came and said, "You've got to meet these two ladies. You're going to love them." Like I said, they have become my dear friends. He loved them, and he loved the town. And he was always at the Emergency Operations Center. I've never seen my husband as upset as he was for those 8 months. His heart was broken. I mean, being the president of the fire chief of the Fire Safe Council, and then having this happen, and we all knew it was a possibility. That's why we had the to-go bags. That's why we didn't lose as many lives, because we had practiced. We literally shut down roads and practiced how to get out of town. But he personalized it so much that it was so hard for him to even comprehend. And so that was difficult. It was difficult to watch him feel like he took some responsibility for that, because he was our 3 kids' best friend. He was my best friend. It's devastating to know that that he's not going to see the rebuild, and that he didn't get to see the film, because he loved Ron. He talked all the time about being at Sierra Nevada, having a beer with Ron. He was a great. He was one of these guys who's just in the most unaffected way is just charismatic and a kind of a natural leader. And you know, the couple of times that I sort of saw him in action and conversation, he was just one of these people, smart, committed, and really you know, personable. It was great to have a beer with him. It was fascinating and memorable.
I'm going to toast one to him tonight after we finish this. We've had some lovely comments from people as well, and reactions to the film that are coming in. JC Chrissy, and lots of people just not really with questions, just thoughts and thanks really as well, which is so nice. JC Chrissy says, "Thank you, BAFTA, for putting this on, and greetings from London." Laurie Kearns says, "Good morning from Southern California." Stay safe, says Sophia. Hello, everybody. Greetings from London. Laurie says, looking forward to seeing the documentary. Thank you so much, Mr. Howard. Hello, everybody. Greetings from London. Angela says, greetings from the Lake District, where forest is very dry at the moment, and after 2 months, not much rain. This is great. Laurie says, Michelle is awesome and an incredible woman. She's my sister. I also lived in Paradise. There's nobody better to tell the story than Michelle, John. We all agree on that one for sure. Barbara Butler says, the high school graduation on the field made me cry. I was so happy you were able to put that together. Bravo. Alison says, nice job. You really did this fantastic work on this film. And thank you from Santa Monica. Amazing true stories and real people, the source for great movies, which is a really valid point, I think, Ron, from someone who, you know, who's made extraordinary films on both sides of it. And I think it's so lovely to hear you talk about how you were a fear of going into making documentaries, you know, in terms of how accomplished you are as a filmmaker. But I guess that those two worlds almost must help each other in a way as well, like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, well, I've learned a lot, and I'm just finishing up a scripted film right now for Netflix called Hillbilly Elegy, which is, you know, another film based on real events. Yeah. But we were struggling to get an idea solved in the editing room some months back, and I literally said, how would we do this in a documentary? How would we get this idea across? Because what's fascinating is you learn so much, and yet, you know, if you're playing fair, if you don't have a narrator, you who can explain your thesis and your premise and point things out, you wind up building scenes and inferring using, you know, cinematic grammar, and it's the kind of exercise that I haven't actually engaged in all that much, because usually I can just, you know, we'll write a wild line or go do a pickup shot and just say it. And so I think for me, it's sort of, you know, broadened my sense of cinema and what it means, and it's also stimulating for me, because I've learned I really have from Apollo 13 on. Apollo 13 was the first film that I made based on real events. You know, I've made a number of them now. I find it incredibly satisfying, but that's still a different exercise and a different set of challenges. And there's you know, you're supposed to encapsulate and engross and entertain, and that's part of the understanding. It's part of the relationship with the audience. It's part, and with the documentary, there's this other tacit understanding that, you know, it's at least one part journalism, and while it's going to reflect the filmmaker's point of view, you know, it's not straight news. But it is, there is, you know, if you're trying to operate with some integrity, it's meant to reflect your observed truth.
This is a great question. It's come in from, who did it come in from? Alison. Ron, she wants to know, how long was your first assembly?
Oh, well, it was in the 2:45 to 3, but you have to realize that because it took a year, I mean, we almost never had an assembly until we had a cut. I mean, because we kept building them, you know, first in these sort of pods, following characters, then beginning to intercut them, then to get a sense of the rhythm, and already shortening. So we never had like didn't have the luxury of, here's everything we have strung together, let's have a look. Yeah. And so, you know, the first time we sat down, it was probably dealing with the first 3 months, and it was, you know, probably 45 minutes of material. So we were always shaping right until we basically, you know, grabbed the files and ran to Sundance, because we were just barely completed the movie before we premiered it at Sundance.
I love that. I have a proper image of you with a reel of film under your arm.
Yeah, you can't. It's not as romantic anymore. It's just a little thing, you know.
Don't spoil it for me. Don't spoil. What else have we got here? This is great. JP O'Connor and Matt Bolan, Paradise residents, the Payne family, love the John family. We miss Phil greatly, they say. Thank you, says Ronnie Masuda. And this is a question, kind of covered it with that question you said about the difference between challenges between docs and narrative, but another question off the back of that is, how many camera crews did you work with on this film?
There were a couple of times we had 2 camera crews to cover Christmas and a couple of other bigger scenes, and some of the meetings, Phil's celebration and town council and a few things like that. When I would go, I would usually try to shoot. It's a little pathetic, but as I said, sometimes even a blind pig finds an acorn, but for the most part, it was one camera operator covering the story, and we had several teams that would come and go, and also we were able to collect and collaborate quite a bit with some local filmmakers.
Brilliant.
Not just iPhone footage, but I mean some of that footage in the fires. Some slow-mo material, and so that's beautifully photographed, and that's a professional, living in paradise. And so our main crews, led by Zan and Liz, would they'd get there a couple of times a month usually, but there were certain events that just needed to be followed, and they had relationships with people, filmmakers, who would go cover it. So there was a lot of collecting and gathering, and a lot of cooperation, which we all appreciated.
I'd love to ask quickly about the music, if you don't mind, because it's a huge part of the film, I think, as well. Just a beautiful score by Hans Zimmer and Lorne Balfe, who I know you've worked with before, Super Hans. I think you referred to him last time we spoke.
Or the maestro.
Hans Sylvania.
Zimmer Monica. He's got a wonderful, in Santa Monica, wonderful studio. We call it Zimmer Monica. Well, I've worked with Hans many times. I've worked with Lorne, Balfe many times as well. Lauren also did Genius, my season of Genius, where I was the director, and with about Albert Einstein. And I was meeting with Hans coincidentally to talk about the fact that I was going to do Hillbilly Elegy, and I was inviting him to do that. And I said, but I've launched into my first verite documentary, and crews are there. I just got back from Paradise. And he said, I want to do that one too. And so he did. Lauren wound up doing a tremendous amount of work, and both were, really committed to the film, and of course, incredibly creative, but just, a great feeling for what it could be. For me, it's been a pretty fascinating, 18 months or so, 2 years, to be so focused on 2 stories that are so American. I've been working outside the U.S. a lot, and it's interesting right at this moment to be so focused on kind of contemporary American heartland, and from 2 different perspectives. J.D. Vance's family story based on his memoir, and of course our documentary about Paradise, California. And so it's been, I tackled these stories because I could relate to them and I could connect with them, and I had a sense of the people. These were people living in communities where I recognized the cadences of the voices and those expressions and the attitudes, and it was it's been great to sort of engage and understand. And I've it's been a fascinating, creative couple of years getting these 2 stories ready to share.
Michelle, how's Paradise now? It's kind of almost like I want to know how everybody is and how you are. And
It's slowly being rebuilt, very, very slowly. I think there's probably close to 5,000 people now. We lost 5 of our 9 school campuses. So we combined our campuses all together in a few campuses. Kind of devastated the school system. We have less than half of the people we had before. I personally, the house my husband and I had lived in was way too much for me. And we did not lose our house. We were one of 3% that didn't lose our house. So I was lucky enough to sell it, but I bought a small piece of property there. Even though I've moved to Nevada right now to be closer to my kids, we raised our kids. Paradise is our home. And although the friends are scattered far and near, our close group, a lot of them are still there because they're the ones that are rebuilding. Mm-hmm. So I will eventually go back to Paradise. It's just Phil for me also. I think it's going to be a slow, hard rebuild, and it will not look the same, but hopefully it will be better. It will be better. The personal stories are sad on what people are doing and how difficult it is for them. But I think that people have the resiliency, and I think that they will rebuild slowly. And if they don't, they're going to start their lives somewhere else, which is better for them and their family. There's some real sad stories. It's very tough on relationships. And then a lot of people haven't made it together, and that kind of breaks your heart when that happens. Yeah. It's just such a big tragedy that you think this will never happen to our town or us. And then when it does, and you're right in the middle of it, it's kind of surreal. It still is surreal at this point in my life. Surreal that Phil's not here, surreal everything that's happened the last 18 months. It's some days you can't even imagine that it could have occurred. But you don't have a choice. You have to keep going and try and make it better.
Well, I can't thank you personally enough for sharing your story and allowing Ron, and his team to tell your story, and such a personal story as well. But your resilience is something that, and your determination and your spirit is something that I think just exudes this film. It's extraordinary. So thank you so much for your time, Michelle. It's been wonderful to chat to you. And Ron, congratulations on this film. It's been great to chat to you both. Take care, be safe. Thank you, guys. Thank you everybody, for watching. Bye. Take care, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.